It was a very ambitious idea, but very difficult to organize. At first, they wanted to remove the Jews from Germany and the incorporated territory to the general government. The resettlement policy had a hugely negative impact for the Jews living in Krakow, where the number of Jews increased dramatically from 56 to 68,000. The resettled Jews were poor and had no reasonable prospect for life, because all their belongings had been left behind and they had to depend upon help from the Jewish community. In Krakow, there wasn't enough space, food, and sanitary condition for such a drastic number of incomers. The Jewish authorities, in cooperation with the Jewish medical personnel, organized a number of institutions to protect society from hunger and the epidemics of typhus, as well as to help them to organize their lives during the war condition. At first, they created a special unit known as the Sanitary Commission. The initiator and the head of this institution was Dr. Maurycy Haber, who was also a member of the Judenrat. Because of his activities, 156 doctors and 110 alternative medical personnel started voluntary work and successfully carried out health and hygiene checks among the Jewish residents. Before the ghetto in Krakow was created, the Sanitary Commission worked in 3 areas of the city: Kazimierz, where the Jewish district was located, Stradom, and Podgórze, where most of the Jewish residents were living. The commission functioned until the liquidation of the ghetto in Krakow, which was in March 1943. The most significant achievement of this institution was that as long as it was in operation, no epidemic ever broke out in Krakow. The other very important institution before the war in Krakow was the Jewish hospital, located on Skawinska Street, which was founded in the middle of the 19th century. After the occupation of Krakow began, the hospital was closed for 2 months. However, because of the rising number of Jews in Krakow, it meant that it was necessary to reopen this hospital. Again, this was also possible because of the work carried out by the voluntary medical personnel, from whom only 8 out of 42 physicians were paid by the Judenrat. The hospital director and the head of the surgery department was Józef Nussenfeld. In addition, the internal medical unit was run by Dr. Maximilian Blasberg in collaboration with Dr. Julian Aleksandrowicz. Dr. Jan Lachs was the head of the gynecology unit, and the urology unit was run by Dr. Romuald Lachs, who worked in tandem with Dr. Leopold Linsfeld. The conditions were extremely difficult. Financial resources were scarce, and doctors were torn away from their work and used by the Germans to complete duties, especially snow clearance, just like all other Jewish inhabitants of the city. After the ghetto in Krakow opened, the hospital was moved to a new location inside its walls, specifically to Józefińska Street, where there was only 120 beds. The hospital was constantly overcrowded. It was not uncommon for 2 patients to have to share the same bed. Since the Department of Infectious Diseases was lacking before the war in the Jewish hospital, they had to cooperate with non-Jewish hospital. After the occupation started, there was no possibility to continue this cooperation. So Dr. Alexander Bieberstein created a Jewish infectious diseases hospital located on Rękawka Street in April 1940. It was a very small hospital with only 35 beds, sponsored by the Jewish community. Later, when the area of the ghetto was reduced, the hospital was relocated to Plac Zgody. In the middle of 1940, Dr. Jakub Kranz established a hospital for the elderly and infirm on Miodowa Street. It contained 60 beds. After the ghetto was created, the hospital was relocated onto Limanowskiego Street. At the end of 1942, Dr. Julian Aleksandrowicz established a hospital for the chronically ill, which was created in the ghetto, and it held 50 beds. Every one of these 4 hospitals remained open until the ghetto in Krakow collapsed. In 1940, the general governor, Hans Frank, decided to establish Krakow as a pure German city. So the Germans ordered all the Jews to be expelled. Only 15,000 citizens who were craftsmen and tradesmen were allowed to stay. This legislation resulted in creating massive upheaval for the Jewish people. This also included the medical personnel, who had a lot of work to do to help and organize the transportation of sick and elderly patients, as well as negotiating with the government to allow these patients to stay in the city. This was possible because many medical doctors were also members of the Judenrat in Krakow or were in charge of other charity organizations. During the period when the ghetto in Krakow existed, which was March 1941 to March 1943, the Germans organized 4 deportations of Jewish people. The first one took place in November 1941. The Jews were deported to Lublin area and released. The next 2 deportations took place in both June and October 1942, during which the Jews were deported to extermination camp in Bełżec. The total number of Jews killed in these 2 deportations was 11,000. The last deportation happened on the 13th of March 1943, when the ghetto was dismantled. Jews who couldn't walk and weren't able to transfer to the camp in Płaszów were sent to be exterminated in Auschwitz-Birkenau. During the first and the second deportation, the hospital patients were relieved from the order to leave the ghetto. In October 1942, the patients from both main hospital and the infectious diseases hospital, as well as many of the medical personnel, were deported to the death camp in Bełżec. While the last deportation was taking place, the entire medical personnel were ordered to leave the buildings. After this, all the patients who remained were shot. Dr. Alexander Bieberstein recalled that during the first deportation to Bełżec, as a physician, he spent all day on Plac Zgody together with the people who were destined to be deported, providing them with medical help. However, as the next deportation took place, the Germans forbade the physician to assist. In addition, Tadeusz Pankiewicz, who was a Polish owner of the pharmacy in ghetto, distributed medicine during the deportations. The most difficult time for the doctors in the hospitals in the ghetto was when they were forced into making a decision whether to allow their patients or family members' lives to be taken away in a peaceful way before the Germans brutally murdered them. Bieberstein wrote that he knew 3 doctors who poisoned their patients because they knew they had no chance to survive. In addition, Dr. Julian Aleksandrowicz wrote in his memoirs that during the second deportation, after he was sure that the patients from his hospital would be killed, he ordered everybody who could walk to leave the hospital, and he gave cyanide to those who couldn't move from their beds. In his memoir, he also wrote that he understood completely that as a physician, he should endeavor to maximize the lifespan of his patient. But on the other hand, he knew that he had to limit their suffering. This was one of the most difficult decisions of his life. His second difficult decision was when he decided to escape from the ghetto with his wife and child. However, his parents refused to join them. Thus, he left them in the ghetto for unavoidable death. From the memoirs of the Jewish people who survived the war in Krakow, it is clear to see that the Jewish medical personnel were very active in helping and saving people's lives, or at least reducing their suffering, during which they had to make many difficult decisions regarding to the plight of the Jewish people in the ghetto. At the end of this presentation, I would like to say a few additional words about the best well-known Jewish physician from this period. Alexander Bieberstein, he was the founder of a small hospital. He tried in every possible way to save the Jews. During the first deportation to the Belzec death camp, all patients in the hospital were not included in the act of segregation, so he accepted many healthy individuals as patients, saving their lives. When the second deportation took place, the patients were now the subject of segregation, but the physicians weren't. Thus, Bieberstein dressed the patients as physicians, so he was able to save their lives this way. He was also an author of the most well-known memoirs published after the war, from which we know many details about the history of the Jews in Krakow. Julian Aleksandrowicz, he was the founder of a hospital for the chronically ill. He also tried to help the Jewish people as much as possible, and as such, he hid them throughout his hospital. In 1943, he escaped from the ghetto and became a physician for the Polish resistance. For this, he received the Silver Cross of Virtuti Militari. And now I would like to show you a few archival pictures. The first one is the view of the entrance gate to the Krakow ghetto, and the inscription in Yiddish, it's Jewish quarter. Yes. And those pictures are propaganda pictures. The author of them was Arthur Grimm. We don't know the names of the people, which physician were there, but still we can see a few of them here. And here is also the Jewish physician with Jewish children. Good. Yes, okay. And the last one is a newly arrived Jewish in the Krakow ghetto who were prepared to prevent typhus. Okay, thank you.